All right. Good morning. That's right, JJ. I'm gonna react to JJ this morning. Can you hear me? Okay. How we doing? Sorry, it's running around. There's construction going on right outside our house. They're really loud and it's annoying. I was trying to record videos and trying to live stream, and they're just not. Anyway, I'm glad they're making progress out there. But how are you doing? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. See, okay. Thank you, LeBron. LeBron, thank you. Oh, let's get the comments on the stage here. Tom was first. One more sub till he hits 700. Subscribe to Tom Tries It right now. That's mandatory. Okay. Hello, Lumenmoth. Hello. What a week indeed. Holy crap. Where to begin? I don't even know. Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of ICE. ICE is a terrorist organization. I actually tweeted this. Nuke, we made it to Friday. Congratulations. Yeah, the whole I mean, we're on the wrong timeline. I shared or responded to a clip of the great Jesse the Body Ventura, former governor of Minnesota. He was defending the high school that was taking a stand against ICE yesterday, and the media caught him. He hasn't been seen in public for years, but some local media outlets caught him. Actually, I should play that clip. I was like so fired up about it, but I was like, in the right timeline, this man would be the president instead of the current draft dodger. Yeah, let me see. Let me pull it up here for you. Let's start off with this. Was it on? Yeah, it was on Twitter, unfortunately. It's just been a mess. It just gets worse and worse each week. I guess we knew this was going to happen. It's going to probably continue to get worse throughout this year, but it's hard to keep up with all this crap. Yeah, here it is. Let's just play this. This will get you fired up. Let me put the headphones on here. Sorry. And we got the... While I'm loading this up here, today I'm releasing a video about the 7th party system. Actually, all the party systems explained. I'm excited to release it finally. Been working on that one for a while. There he is, Jesse freaking Ventura. They caught him. Like, he's still alive. He's an old man now. He's about the same age as Trump, I think. They used to be friends, by the way, back when Ventura was governor.
Feel better to have that conversation, or what would you say?
No, I'm just saying, as a graduate of Roosevelt High School and as the former governor of Minnesota, I'm so proud of Roosevelt High School and how they stood up for what is supposed to be America and freedom. And freedom is not arresting people without warrants. We have a system here. It's called a Constitution. And we have a party, the Republicans, who don't seem to want to abide by the Constitution. January 6th is a prime example of that. And now they're all free and they're in charge. You know what? Maybe it's time for Jesse. I only did one term. I'm owed a second.
Mr. Ventura, can you remind us, you went to school here?
I went to school here. I'm a 1969 graduate of Minneapolis Roosevelt. I'm proud of them for what they did. They made me proud as an alumni. Go Teddies.
What are your thoughts? I know we're jumping in, probably doubling up on some of his questions, but what are some of your thoughts about what unfolded yesterday? And then after that, what you saw?
Well, I've told you already, we're a country of the Constitution. We have leadership now that has destroyed the Constitution. They don't follow it. They could care less about it. Am I right or wrong?
They couldn't care less about it, Jesse.
I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I view, after January 6th, the Republican Party as a domestic enemy to our Constitution. I can't get any bolder than that, can I?
And you obviously saw the video.
Hey, speaking of January 6th, let's go ahead. I also pulled up the whitehouse.gov, which is continuing to show. I mean, we're seeing more and more revisionist history out of this Trump administration, and January 6th. They went there. They have already, on the 5-year anniversary of the January 6th Capitol attacks, we now see they have updated the whitehouse.gov website. This is now what it looks like. You see Nancy Pelosi, and you see the members of Congress who led an investigation into the January 6th Capitol attacks. And then check this out. I had a friend, my friend Jabril, shout out to him, sent me this. Otherwise, I would not have known about it. President Trump took decisive action to pardon January 6 defendants who were unfairly targeted, overcharged, and used as political examples. They were not protected by the leaders who failed them. They were punished to cover incompetence. On his first day back in office, January 20th, 2025, President Trump issued sweeping blanket pardons and commutations for nearly 1,600 patriotic, he calls them patriotic Americans, prosecuted for their presence at the Capitol. Many mere trespassers or peaceful protesters treated as insurrectionists by a weaponized Biden DOJ. He fully pardoned most, commuted sentences, and ordered immediate release of those still in prison, ending years of harsh solitary confinement, which I don't know if that was true or not. I don't like solitary confinement, but still. Denied due process and family separation for exercising their First Amendment rights. It's not your First Amendment rights to trespass, vandalize, terrorize, and harm police officers. Like, that's not your First Amendment right. We don't have a First Amendment right to attack police officers. It goes on similar like this. Since January 6, 2021, Nancy Pelosi spent over 3 years and nearly $20 million in taxpayer funds on her partisan select committee, producing a scripted TV spectacle to fabricate an insurrection narrative and pin all the blame on President Trump. I mean, President Trump, I think, did incite violence that day when he told everyone to march down to the Capitol. And we saw all the video footage with our own eyes. They gaslight us time and time again. This really happened because we saw it in 4K. We saw all the footage. We saw it live as it was happening. Live streams of people vandalizing and trespassing the Capitol. But you see, they use that same language, this gaslighting narrative. We have footage. We have actual video footage. You saw the same thing happen with this murder of this American citizen by ICE. Same thing. They immediately gaslight us, saying you don't see what you saw. What you saw with your own eyes with 4K footage from many different angles. Now we have different angles. We all saw the witnesses there. Eyewitnesses, okay, eyewitness testimony isn't the most reliable. I get it. But no, we all saw footage filming the actual event. And immediately afterwards, we have so many Republicans, Trump defenders saying, no, that police officer or that ICE officer was defending himself. She was the mother who was murdered by ICE, who was shot in the face. They said, the freaking vice president, J.D. Vance, says, hey, she shouldn't have drove off like that. The police, the ICE, I keep saying police. It's not the police. These are terrorists. These are ICE officers that should not be there to begin with. It's illegal. This is not a national emergency. These ICE agents should not be terrorizing these cities like they're doing. But he clearly just murdered her. He was not going to get run over by her. All the footage shows that she was trying to avoid hitting him, and she was scared for her life. And I guess she had good reason to be scared for her life, right? But I think the most disturbing thing to me is the gaslighting immediately afterwards. The vice president goes on and say, you're not seeing what you're seeing, calling us crazy for looking at footage. Like, It's freaking messed up. It is literally 1984 crap. This is literally 1984 crap. Okay. And then they turn around and say, we're the ones that are gaslighting. Don't trust your lying eyes. That's right. Cool Banana said. It's not just that. I wanted to also point out, in addition to this propaganda, this revisionist history we see on the White House website, they have taken down the plaque. I pull this up here. This plaque that was up at the Capitol to honor the Capitol Police who bravely protected members of Congress on that fateful day, January 6, 2021. It has their names and the departments there. And this plaque is now missing. It's nowhere to be found. The Trump administration has removed this plaque. So this is just another example. Back to this whitehouse.gov, our taxpayer money now funding this disinformation by the Trump administration. Here's a video that's on here for some reason. Let's check this out.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
Yeah. Well, this is evidence against the Trump administration.
No, that is not a question of how they have been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare.
Oh, that's why they put this video up, because I take responsibility. Okay, well, sure. She could have done more too. What is your freaking point? She's a lawmaker. She was at the time Speaker of the House. She was a part of the legislative branch, which their job is to make laws primarily. The executive branch is there to enforce laws. And when your top law enforcement can't protect members of Congress, many of them nearly died, were very close to being probably killed. Sure, she can take responsibility, whatever. The prime responsibility is on the executive branch. So there's more propaganda on here. President Trump corrected a historic wrong, freeing Americans who were going on about some of these people that he freed, by the way, are actually really dangerous criminals. And some of them have committed felonies since their release. It just continues. The war on history continues. All these right-wing politicians and media need to be prosecuted for treason. Yeah, the Democratic Party has failed as well. Cool Banana, you make a good point as far as like that should have been their moment, by the way, and they blew it right then and there. The moment Kevin McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago to speak with Trump, I think that was the moment that the Democrats lost the narrative. But I mean, how can you lose the narrative when you have footage? You have so much footage laying it all out. It's so frustrating that even when like the best, like future historians, when they are looking at the 2020s, they're going to look at video footage, raw video footage, unedited video footage more than anything. And when you have people in power right now saying you can't even trust that level of gaslighting now makes it so that, I mean, yeah, of course. Why should we be surprised that people are afraid that we're on a path towards fascism right now, or we're not already at fascism when this is literally 1984? It's no longer just a meme. It is literally 1984. The quote, that was the party's final command. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. That's literally from 1984. And that's Literally what happened. I can't stress to you how I'm not being sensationalist. I'm not being hyperbolic here. I'm calling it as it is. This is when are Americans going to wake up to this? The Americans who have been falling for this, who are so far removed from reality that you can't even, you're looking at stuff, you're looking at raw footage of something and you're still denying what you're seeing right in front of your eyes. It's just so frustrating. So anyway, that was this week, a murder of a citizen by ICE. ICE has killed people before, by the way, but now it's a citizen, and it's a white citizen. So I guess that's why it got more people's attention. ICE has been terrorizing the streets of American cities for the past year. And what else happened this week? Oh yeah, you know what happened? Like literally a few hours after I saw you last Friday was the United States invaded Venezuela. Regime change, overthrew Maduro, arrested him, kidnapped him, brought him back to the United States. Brought him to the United States. He's never been to the United States, I don't think. Put him on trial for, I guess, aiding the drug cartels transporting bad drugs into the United States. Almost everybody knows that's bullcrap. It's about power. It's about resources, oil, obviously oil, but also the currency, which is tied to the oil. You know, the petrodollar is a real thing. I think that's probably the broader goal is because the world's perception of the dollar has been declining, and that's a concern of the Trump administration, which they should be concerned about that. Some in the Trump administration actually do know what they're doing, but as far as how they're how they're trying to prop up the currency is just straight up stealing resources from another country. I think that's morally and ethically wrong. You probably agree with me as well when I think that imperialism is bad. For the past several decades, the United States has had neo-imperialism. It hasn't just been straight up imperialism. It's been more sneaky, like, oh no, we're just aiding these countries overthrow their corrupt dictators, and we're trying to spread democracy. They asked for our help. We're just aiding them. We're not controlling them. But this seems to be with Venezuela. It seems to be just control, and it doesn't seem like it's going to end here. It's going to continue. Trump wants to take Colombia. He wants to take Cuba. He wants to take Greenland for some reason, even though we can already. Did you know that the United States already has permission to build military bases in Greenland? So that whole justification of, oh yeah, geopolitics, we need to have strategic bases there to protect ourselves from Russia or China. Well, we can already do that. We can already do that. Yeah, Trump lost the argument about it being about drugs when he pardoned the former Honduran president. Very good point, Lumen Moth. And also, he's kind of straight up said it. He said, like, oh yeah, we got the oil. The oil's mine. He even said the oil is mine. The money, I'll control the money of Venezuela. It's gotten so much worse. Each week it gets so much worse. Okay. What else happened this week? I guess those were the big things. We don't want to get caught up too much into the weeds. We're looking at bigger trends. We tried to look at bigger trends on this, in these streams. So, but yeah, more revisionist history. I get fired up about, as you just saw. Speaking of which, that's why I wanted to react to JJ's newest video about PragerU. PragerU is still around. They're not as strong as they used to be, but the fact that PragerU now is in school systems, school districts, taxpayer money is now funding PragerU because curriculums now force teachers to play their crap, use their materials in the classroom. Plus, PragerU propaganda has now found itself inside of taxpayer-funded museums, which I mentioned. We looked at this a few months ago with those AI-generated portraits that came to life. One of the creepiest things I've ever seen. So yeah. Oh, free childcare in New York. That was nice. Thank you, LeBron. Thank you for keeping us positive here and hopeful. But no, so more revisionist history from PragerU. I guess we're not surprised, but I didn't look at this specifically. JJ did. So we're going to watch JJ McCullough's video about PragerU's guide to the presidents. Oh, let me pull this up here.
My name is JJ, and I apologize if this sounds like something out of 2018, but today we are going to dunk on PragerU. Let me explain. As you might have heard, President Trump recently installed this preposterous Hall of Presidents by the former White House Rose Garden, featuring little plaques with little condensed biographies of all of the presidents, several of which he wrote himself. And these got a lot of attention just because of how nakedly partisan and stupid they are. I actually transcribed a bunch of them for posterity because they're really, truly something to behold. For example, President Biden's little biography begins,
Sleepy Joe Biden was by far the worst president in American history, taking office as a result of the most corrupt election ever seen in the United States. Biden oversaw a series of unprecedented disasters that brought our nation to the brink of destruction.
Obama's biography, by contrast, ends with
Obama spied on the 2016 presidential campaign of Donald J. Trump and presided over the creation of the Russia hoax, the worst political scandal in American history.
Several of the biographies of the older presidents include even more strained and gratuitous references to Trump. Take Andrew Jackson's, for instance, which says,
Jackson was unjustifiably treated unfairly by the press, but not as viciously and unfairly as President Abraham Lincoln and President Donald.
I didn't know this one. We didn't talk about this one when we looked at this a few weeks ago. That's so he even went back all the way to Andrew Jackson and was inserting himself into. Wow. And shout out to Soy Pill for doing a very good Trump impersonation here with these quotes.
J. Trump would, in the future, be.
So yes, a completely absurd and childish spectacle. But what does this have to do with PragerU, you ask? Well, you see, even though Trump did clearly write large portions of the mini biographies of the recent presidents, a lot of the biographies of the older presidents that Trump didn't really care about were clearly just pulled from some pre-existing source. Like, here is part of the biography of James Buchanan, for instance, which doesn't sound like Trump at all.
James Old Buck Buchanan was a lawyer, diplomat, and career politician who served as a member of Congress, U.S. Senator, and Secretary of State, playing a key role in seminal events, including the Mexican-American War and Oregon boundary settlement. As president, he contended with the Panic of 1857, a financial crisis that
Man, he makes James Buchanan look so good when he's often considered the worst president in American history for now.
greatly affected the entire nation.
And this got me wondering if maybe the text for these plaques had come from PragerU, which, as I'm sure you know, is a company that bills itself as America's leading conservative educational resource for civics and history. They sell all sorts of books and posters and things and have a popular YouTube channel that a lot of left-wing YouTubers really like to crap on. The Trump administration is known for being close to PragerU, so I thought it was plausible to assume that some of the more boring presidential biographies on the plaques had just been copy and pasted from some PragerU guide to the presidents or something. So with this theory in mind, I ordered this, PragerU Honest Book of Presidents.
He spent money on it. Oh, poor JJ. You need to return this.
Published in 2025. And I'm sorry to say that my thesis was wrong. I did not, in fact, solve the mystery of who wrote the presidential plaques, but I do now have the experience of reading through this thing, and it is quite a fascinating object in its own right. So I'm not as close-minded as some when it comes to PragerU in theory. I think there is indeed a crisis these days of young people not getting a sufficient civics and history education. And I like that PragerU pumps so much money into producing all of these lovely looking educational materials for children and teens.
It's fair enough.
And I even kind of agree with them that some of the widespread ignorance we see among the kids these days is at least partially the result of too many teachers and textbook writers being too woke or left wing, especially when it comes to things like the history of the presidents. I think that
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think, if anything, we have too many historians that are too neoliberal, too neoconservative, too hyper-capitalist, not enough dissenting left-wing voices. I think more mainstream voices often kind of get prominence. Great examples of this is like Ron Chernow is probably a darling of. I mean, clearly leans to the left as a historian, but it's clearly like from a neoliberal mindset and somewhat neoconservative mindset as well. Very Barack Obama-esque instead of Bernie Sanders-esque. And so I think it's a kind of this kind of comes from JJ's bias, I think, but we really never really had much of a true left-wing perspective on history presented in mainstream textbooks. The closest we got was probably Howard Zinn. But yeah, I mean, fair enough. I think you want more moderate voices in mainstream textbooks, so that makes sense to me. PragerU is not a moderate voice. That said, in all fairness, we have to be completely fair here. Some PragerU videos are okay. They get almost all the facts right. They ignore their biases. It tends to be the videos about events that happened a long time ago, so at least 100 years ago or longer, unless it's slavery. But yeah, we shouldn't just say that all PragerU history videos are ahistorical garbage, So I think in fairness, Eric Foner most historians lean to the left. Absolutely. The ones who don't are kind of more like me with libertarianism. They're libertarian. There's a lot of libertarian high school history teachers in the United States. I was definitely influenced by that. Although I'm a left-leaning libertarian, Foner, I think, is though still, he was, if you look at the Crash Course U.S. history videos, they relied heavily on Eric Foner. But again, he's kind of fits the mold of like the six-party system that I want to mention in my video today, neoliberal, neoconservative. To be all right, Damon. JJ doesn't have a home right now. He's a conservative, he's a true conservative. The reality is we don't have a mainstream conservative party here in the United States anymore. We just have a reactionary party and then moderate reaction or moderate reaction party to the reactionary party. So it's kind of ideologically, a lot of people don't have a home right now. And that's why there's a lot of infighting, especially on the left wing side. But I think that JJ has principled views. I'm glad you still respect him. I respect him tremendously, even if we disagree on certain issues, because he has values that are consistent, and he is a good person. He holds true to those morals and values.
Being too quick to judge historical figures by the standards of our own time, rather than the less enlightened times that they lived, is a problem that can lead to historical illiteracy when it becomes the dominant theme of what is being taught. So in theory, I like what this book is promising to deliver. Let me read you a bit from the introduction, written by PragerU Executive Director Alan Estrin. This book is both factual and contextual. That is, our authors explain the chief executives in the context of the era in which they lived. That's why we call it the honest book of presidents. Our authors don't whitewash the truth, but they also don't paint it all black either. Above all, they try to be fair.
Cool.
A worthy goal, but does it meet its own standards? Or is it just right-wing slop? Let us do a review. So first, let me tell you a bit about the basic structure of the Honest Book of Presidents. It is described as being written for kids in grade 9 and above, and appropriate for both classrooms and families.
Yeah, okay. People say that about my channel, and I don't know how I feel about that, by the way. But also, it's like the title of it. Adding the word honest. Think about this. What if I called my channel the Honest Channel on Presidents? Wouldn't that probably cross an ethical line that most history teachers won't want to cross. Everybody's biased. We say this a million times. Everybody does their best to try to teach the truth about the past in terms of history teachers, but it's just nearly impossible. So just saying, like, calling yourselves honest, saying this book is completely honest, I think is dishonest.
Brief 2,000-word chapter, sometimes 2 chapters if the president is considered especially important. These chapters are all written by different people, mostly PragerU board members and pundits, or, as they are rather grandly described by the book itself, some of the most distinguished historians and thinkers in America. In fact, if I was to offer one early criticism of the book, it would be the excessive flattery its contributors are given. At the end of every presidential biography is a rather long biography of the writer themselves, often close to 200 words documenting every degree they have and every book they've written and all the various TV stations they've appeared on. This reminds me of that old joke about how the number of words on your business card correlates with how unimportant you are. But in any case, how is the quality of their writing? So there's kind of a big gap between how the authors write about the early presidents versus how they write about the more recent ones. Overall, most of the early presidents are characterized as being basically impressive and interesting people. If I had to summarize the writing style, I would say it is basically middle-aged people trying to make presidents seem exciting to 14-year-old boys. They tend to devote a lot of their 2,000 words to the president's pre-president.
It's funny. I think JJ actually texted me after he released this video, and he said, my newest video is very Mr. Beat Pilled. And yeah, what he just said, middle-aged men trying to make presidents look cool to 14-year-olds. I feel like that's that really hits close to home in my case. That's really kind of that's like I spend a lot of my time trying to do that.
Potential or even pre-political lives. For example, talking about cool or interesting things they did when they were young. The biography of George Washington, for instance, barely even talks about his presidency at all, and instead focuses on his gallantry as a soldier and general. Although military command was completely new to him, Washington already displayed the intangibles of leadership, decisiveness, the ability to stay calm under pressure, and physical courage. He endured extreme hardships without complaint, facing near-death experiences without flinching. Almost freezing to death and nearly drowning in an icy river were only 2 examples. And I don't think this is bad. I mean, I personally prefer my history to be a little bit less flowery and romantic, but I get the motivation. They want to tell a version of American history that really draws you in. The book puts particular effort into trying to make the traditionally obscure presidents sound interesting and important, and I think they do a pretty good job of this. I particularly enjoyed the biography of Chester A. Arthur, which was written by...
Well, he's really had a lot of help lately with Death by Lightning, that TV show that really makes Chester Arthur look way cooler than he actually is, in my opinion.
Michael Knowles, of all people, and I think it does a good job of making him seem like a consequential and admirable guy. In one of the least
he really wasn't
expected and most remarkable turnabouts in presidential history, the quintessential machine politician, a man who once bragged about vote buying, became the president who enacted the most sweeping civil service reform in 50 years.
Fair enough, but I think there were a lot of other influential figures that should be given more credit for that than him.
Much to the chagrin of his friends, he became an apostle of clean government and set the tone for future reforms that occurred after he left office. This kind of thing reveals one of the more interesting biases of the book, just the degree that it plays into a certain cult of the presidency understanding of American patriotism. The book clearly believes that the vast majority of American presidents were basically good people who did good things, and that American kids should know and appreciate this. All of the early...
I would argue that the vast majority of human beings are good people. I mean, there's only a small percentage of us that are sociopathic or psychopathic. So that's less than 5%. Maybe that percentage might be a little higher. So otherwise, you just have the rest of us who, I think for the most part, have morals or trying to do the right thing, who care about humanity. However, often we fall prey to our worst impulses as a species. A lot of it's tied to tribalism and our ancient ancestors. The fact that many of our ancient ancestors were in tribes and they just naturally distrusted people that were not in their tribe. And that is carried over into the modern world in forms of just creating new tribes based on somewhat arbitrary characteristics, whether it be skin color or whether it be what nation you belong to, the creation of just any kind of political organization, and then making your entire identity revolve around that political organization. These are just a few examples of the human categories we have created to make up for the fact that we no longer just live in small tribes of 150 people. So I think based on that, a lot of presidents, you could say, yeah, they had loyalties to certain groups of people. The vast majority of presidents, for example, also were racist. It doesn't mean like they were evil people. It's just that, yeah, they had these biases due to the environment that they grew up in. And I think that, yeah, historical relativism is really important. We shouldn't completely judge or just, I think, be reductionist in terms of like simplifying it so much that, nope, every president before, every president was a war criminal. Every president was racist. Every president was sexist, yada, yada. I just think that is counterproductive. So I would agree with JJ in that regard. But yeah, the vast majority of presidents, I think, overall tried to do the right thing, try to do what was best for their country and for humanity.
Biographies really stress this idea that most presidents meant well and were doing what they thought was right in the context of their times. Contrary to what some on the left might expect, the biographies do not shy away from acknowledging that many of the presidents were slaveholders or were bad to the Indians and things like that. They just try to portray those things in a context where what was being done was informed by a certain logic that might not have aged well. Here is a typical passage from the biography of Rutherford B. Hayes, the president who notoriously ended Reconstruction after the Civil War. Should Hayes be blamed for the unsatisfactory results of Reconstruction and the subsequent rise of racist Jim Crow laws? He frequently is, but should he be?
I mean, he is not frequently by historians. He didn't single-handedly end Reconstruction. It was just his election that ended it. That was a group of several members of Congress that actually worked that out. So he had very little to do with that. So this is just a fundamental misunderstanding of history, actually, right here. This demonstrates that.
The country wanted to put the war behind it. There was little popular will for the occupation to continue, and it's doubtful that Congress would have consented to keeping federal troops in the South for much longer.
There you go.
No matter who was president.
So they just contradicted themselves.
To the 20th century, the only presidents who are portrayed as being decisively bad are probably Taylor, Pierce, Buchanan, and Johnson. A lot are portrayed as being controversial, but more good than bad.
Like Andrew Jackson,
with the bad
probably.
Parts forgivable. I think it's interesting to imagine what a book that continued this approach right up to the present day would be like. You know, treating every US president as essentially a well-meaning and impressive person. But alas, the PragerU book does not do this because ultimately PragerU is part of a 21st century partisan political project, and at some point it becomes necessary to start portraying America's presidents as either heroes or villains in a way that validates modern-day Republican narratives and thereby encourages readers to like the Republican Party. I would say it is the biography of William Howard Taft when things start to get noticeably biased in a more pointedly ideological direction, as opposed to just the direction of making you love everyone. Taft is portrayed as a good guy, a sensible, moderate conservative, worried by the rise of unrestrained progressivism in the US, which he sees as tyrannical and unconstitutional.
And yet he was more of a trust buster than Teddy Roosevelt was.
Worries about this sort of impulse in his mentor, former President Teddy Roosevelt, who leaves the Republican Party to run against Taft as a third-party progressive candidate in the 1912 election alongside the Democrat candidate Woodrow Wilson. The election is characterized thusly. Roosevelt and Democratic candidate Woodrow Wilson campaigned as progressives, seeking to fundamentally change the American political system. Taft steered a more traditional course. Unfortunately, his campaign theme, defending the Constitution, excited few voters at a time when progressivism was all the rage. And I would say this is the first time in the book when presidential elections start to be framed not as a worthy battle between two candidates with distinct but basically honorable agendas, but rather a more Manichaean split between the forces of right and wrong. Woodrow Wilson, who beats Taft, is accordingly portrayed as a scheming character, a pompous Ivy League academic seduced by fashionable theories that reject traditional American values of individual freedom in favor of bossy know-it-all government.
It's funny because, you know, I think ever since Glenn Beck went on tirades against Woodrow Wilson when he was on Fox News, what was this, like 15 years ago now, maybe longer, he would just go on and on about Woodrow Wilson being so bad. And I think that's the first time a lot of conservatives started to hate Woodrow Wilson. And I think a lot of them realized, oh, he was a Democrat. Oh, yeah, Democrat's bad. When really, I think a lot of the ideas of Woodrow Wilson, many Republicans would actually agree with.
As president, he is cast as a sort of petty tyrant, imposing what is repeatedly referred to as a fundamental transformation of America. Wilson's program marked the arrival of the idea that government was not merely the servant of the people, but its savior. Ironically, he entitled his program The New Freedom. Woodrow Wilson is no doubt a complex and flawed president, but what is telling about this biography is that it marks the first point in the book when any pretense of nuance or fairness starts to be abandoned. It does not acknowledge, for example, that Wilson was very popular in his own time, and for a while was even considered one of America's canonically greatest presidents by a fairly broad bipartisan consensus. I mean, they didn't put him on the $100,000 bill for nothing. David Frum wrote a good piece about Wilson in The Atlantic a while ago that I think actually does meet the criteria of a fair assessment of a controversial president by the standards of his own time. And importantly, he also discusses how conservatives in recent years have made a conscious effort to cast Wilson as one of the greatest villains in American history, largely because he was a champion of the idea that well-designed public programs could help drive positive social reform, or as the title of his chapter in the PragerU book calls him, the founder of big government. As David Frum writes, Wilson was one of the first American scholars to study.
You could go back much further than that when you're saying the founder of big government. You could go back to Teddy Roosevelt, William McKinley, even because of the imperialism that he brought. How about Abraham Lincoln? How about, go back to Andrew Jackson, for crying out loud.
The emerging administrative state, and conservatives imagine that if they can discredit him, they can discredit it as well. Over the last few years, theatrically hating Woodrow Wilson has become a very fashionable thing to do, and people might be right or wrong to do it. But the point is, conservatives like to hate him for very particular ideological reasons.
I'm pretty sure that JJ has not seen my Woodrow Wilson video. I really want to hear his thoughts about it.
And in the book's treatment of him, you see for the first time the need to make a Democrat president look bad take precedent over what the introduction promised, trying to be fair. That spirit of fairness, however, does abruptly return.
Tom and Mrs. Beat is right. The internet hates him, but why? I think to simplify it, perhaps oversimplify it, is those on the left tend to not like Wilson because of his racism and racist policies. Those on the right tend to not like him because he expanded the size of government and was a bit tyrannical. But actually, you could say both those on the left and right were against his tyranny, especially his response to dissidents, like people protesting World War I, people that were accused of sympathizing with communists during World War I and immediately afterwards. So I go into it all in my video, but I'm pretty sure JJ has not seen my video. He probably doesn't know about some of the stuff
The
about
three
Wilson.
Republican presidents of the 1920s, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover, who are all portrayed, once again, as well-meaning and mostly successful, but with their virtues now being cast in a more ideological light. They're all explicitly praised for being champions of small and restrained government, which is credited for fostering the strength of the American economy during the 1920s when taxes and regulations on business were low. In fairness to PragerU, I could say that these presidents did indeed believe these things, and praising them for it would be consistent with the book's general theme of giving the benefit of the doubt to whatever presidents believed to be true at the time. But even then, it's a little bit much to call Harding's chapter the least appreciated president, and Coolidge's chapter the best president you don't know, as the issues that the presidents are forced to deal with.
I get that, though. I get it. Ever since Ronald Reagan praised Coolidge, that's kind of been the Heritage Foundation's like big thing when talking about presidential history. Oh, Coolidge, man, he was all the rage. He just doesn't get any love. And Harding has started to become more in style in recent years too as well. I even now think that Warren Harding wasn't as bad as I once thought he was.
Start to become more identifiably modern. The book takes a more stridently propagandistic tone, encouraging the reader to correlate certain contemporary conservative ideas like small government with being good, and ideas of the contemporary left like progressive reform and activist government as being bad. FDR is portrayed as basically a failure, with his New Deal programs to battle the Great Depression cast as a lot of big government nonsense that actually made the crisis worse. As the final sentences of his first chapter assert, we can praise President Roosevelt's war service all we like, but there's no way around that New Deal record.
I actually like Amity Shlaes. She wrote a phenomenal biography about Calvin Coolidge. There's a big reason why I think Coolidge was so great. So, but yeah, she's clearly a right-wing historian who heavily libertarian pilled, and also wrote a book about how the New Deal was a failure, about how I mean, so yeah, this is not surprising coming from Amity. She's said a lot of things like this before, and she's been really quiet recently about clearly, like, supposedly the ideals of someone like Calvin Coolidge, who she praised, would not mesh very well with the current administration, and she's been very silent on the atrocities of the current administration.
President Franklin Roosevelt himself put the great in Great Depression. Roosevelt's war service, in turn, is rather tediously portrayed entirely through the prism of big business's contribution to the production of weapons during World War II. This is cast as evidence that Roosevelt was only really successful when he resisted his big government impulses. Or, as it says in the closing line of his second chapter, all this was made possible because the president learned from his past mistakes and had the courage to meet a new situation with a new idea. His closest advisors wanted him to put all of his chips on government control, but he chose to bet the future of freedom on American capitalism instead. Truman, Eisenhower, and JFK are again treated fairly and sympathetically, mostly on their own terms, which I guess reflects how they were mostly centrist characters who are hard to fit into a modern left-right framing. By the time we get to Lyndon Johnson,
Truman,
however, we have really entered the realm of pure partisan propaganda. Like Roosevelt, Johnson is portrayed as pushing a lot of expensive big government programs that just waste a lot of money and don't really do anything. Like Wilson, he is cast as someone who wanted to fundamentally change America simply out of his own sense of vanity and self-importance. Here is the last passage of the first Johnson chapter, which deals with domestic policy. We hear all of the time that the Great Society was a great success. Perhaps that's because romanticizing government intervention is a rule in public radio and television, both institutions made possible through a 1967 law signed by Johnson. Today might be the moment to clear our heads and the moment to take the Great Society record seriously. Yes, we are living in Lyndon Johnson's America, but that doesn't mean we have to. Nixon, by contrast, is given a glowing review by famed conservative pundit Hugh Hewitt, who describes him as America's most misunderstood and underappreciated president. Bad news for Warren Harding, I suppose. At this point, the biographies are starting to sprinkle in hackish phrases like liberal elites while sneering at the media.
Oh boy. And then superlatives in general.
Contemptuous way. I will say that Carter's biography is surprisingly generous and even concedes him some impressive achievements, though still.
I mean, his reputation went way up in recent years. And yeah, since he recently died, it's not ideal for, I mean, politically, it doesn't make much sense to just talk a lot of trash about a guy who recently died who was beloved by so many Americans.
Portrays him as a failure overall. And this is interesting because for most other presidents who have a reputation for being ineffective, like Hoover or Nixon or Harding or the Bushes, the book goes out of its way to suggest that actually
Bush Sr. is seen as a very effective president, actually. Bush Jr., okay.
They were very successful, and we shouldn't be so quick to swallow all of the overly critical conventional wisdom about them. Which again is fair enough if the book aspires to be fundamentally uplifting and celebratory across the board. But at this point in the book, conventional wisdom is only portrayed as being wrong when it is too critical of Republicans or too complimentary of Democrats. If a Republican is generally considered to be good in the broad cultural imagination, like Ronald Reagan, then his goodness is aggressively affirmed, as Governor Scott Walker does in his biography of Reagan, where he calls him the man who...
Scott Walker wrote the biography of Reagan in this book. Okay, this book lost all credibility.
...resurrected and redefined America. But the popularity of somebody like Bill Clinton is undermined by calling him the luckiest president in U.S. history for presiding over an era of peace and
I think that would be Trump.
Prosperity, and ultimately concludes that he was a disappointment because although much was accomplished, so much more could have been done. The biographies of the last three
actually say that about Obama.
Presidents, however, just completely descend into like Breitbart style slop. Obama's biography, written by a rather infamous PragerU contributor named Carol Swain.
Oh yeah, of course they
do
identity politics. They have to make sure that they get an African American. She's like their token African American on anything dealing with race in America. She's the one.
Impatient egomaniac who inflamed racial tensions, tried to destroy the U.S. healthcare system for no real reason, and unleashed chaos on the Middle East through his Iran nuclear deal. The book is very big into this idea that one of the worst things a Democrat can do is to seek to transform America, which is synonymous with being unpatriotic, unless I guess Ronald Reagan does it. So this is another bad thing that Obama is repeatedly accused of doing, wanting to fundamentally transform the US. Or how about this line, which appears early in his biography? After describing his historic victory as the first black president, we would later learn that the man whose triumph testified to America's greatness rejected America's greatness. And I mean, I really just don't know if that's the most fair and honest summary you could give to Barack Obama in the context of a book that also calls Richard Nixon America's most misunderstood president. I'm always very interested in how Trump, who I think by any definition is obviously the weirdest president in American history, can be presented as basically normal in the context of things like textbooks for ninth graders. I made a whole other video where I discuss this in some detail. In the context of this book, the Trump chapter, which is written by Neil Ferguson, portrays Trump as being basically successful on the policy front and only controversial to the
I thought it was Niall Ferguson. He's actually a pretty respected dude.
Extent that he is forced to endure constant unfair attacks from Democrats. Let me just read you this extended passage on the 2020 election, because I think it very clearly illustrates what I'm talking about. So it's just finished describing George Floyd's death. Orchestrated by the group Black Lives Matter and fanned by Democrats and the media, protests and riots erupted across the country. It was in this feverish atmosphere that the 2020 election campaign took place. The Democrats insisted on mail-in balloting, ostensibly to avoid spreading the coronavirus. In many states, they got their way. Unwisely, Trump discouraged Republicans from casting postal votes. Despite spending most of the race in the basement of his Delaware home, the Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, won 81 million votes, 15 million more than Barack Obama had in 2012 to Trump's 74 million. Trump was convinced the election had been stolen. On January 6, 2021, he encouraged a large crowd to march to the Capitol. Partially because of woefully inadequate policing, the protest ran out of control. In the aftermath, the Democrats again impeached Trump. When this failed, they unleashed a barrage of criminal and civil cases against him. Biden,
Honestly, that was mostly fair. That wasn't that as bad as I was thinking. But yeah, still pretty biased, yeah.
meanwhile, whose chapter is given the ominous title of Decline and Fall, is bluntly described as being incapable of doing the job. Biden's old age might have been forgiven if, as promised, he'd unified the nation by governing as a sensible moderate. Instead, he further divided it by moving far to the left.
This is slightly to the left economically, but not far enough, according to many Democrats.
Another framing the book really likes. If a Republican is known to be controversial, the book says it is because Democrats or the media didn't like him. If a Democrat is controversial, however, this is just taken to be a logical consequence of the objectively bad things he did. More than any other president in this entire book, Biden is portrayed as a man with basically no redeeming qualities, whose presidency was just a complete and abject failure on every conceivable level. If this was your only source of information about the US presidents, I think you would very clearly walk away agreeing with the conclusion of the Trump auto pen plaque that Sleepy Joe was indeed the worst president in American history. This is also, incidentally,
he was not
the conclusion of a supplementary survey that PragerU did on the presidents as part of a larger promotional campaign for the book. They asked 155 conservative big shots to rank the presidents, and in the average ranking that followed, Joe Biden was placed dead last.
Wow.
Even worse than such villains as Carter, Obama, and Wilson. Trump.
Worse than James Buchanan and Andrew Johnson and Franklin Pierce. Wow. Who are these people? That's crazy. Okay. I do have to go. I have to get a haircut because I'm turning into a darn hippie. And so I have an appointment actually I made. So I got to go. But thank you all for being here. Later today, I'm releasing a video about the 7 party systems, the 7 political eras of American history, and that will come out this afternoon. So I'm continuing to write my congressman every day until he changes his mind about uncapping the House. So please continue to follow that. He has responded, but it was a very generic response, and you can kind of keep up with progress with that on social media. The best place to follow me probably is Blue Sky. If you're on any other social media platforms, I don't know why you are. Blue Sky is clearly superior. So hopefully, and if you're on there, by the way, please send me a message and say, hey, this is username blah, blah, blah from Twitch, because I want to follow all of you. I want to get to know you all better. Anyway, so yeah, Mr. Fresh. Yeah, go bald. Well, I'm starting to. I'm doing my best. All right. Well, thank you guys. Have a good weekend, and stay safe out there. Take care of your family and your friends. That's the most important thing. Watch out for ICE, the terrorists that are terrorizing the streets. All right. Have a good weekend. Bye.